Onboarding is the process of bringing a new partner into your organization. This is a little bit different than hiring a person who will be an employee of the company. Instead, this is a third-party organization or a third-party individual who will now have access to assets, data, and other things that are within your organization. Obviously, there will be a number of legal agreements that have to be resolved before any onboarding can occur. You're bringing someone into the organization who is not an employee, so they don't have any responsibility that a normal employee might have. Usually agreements are made regarding the type of data someone might have access to, or what should happen if there are any problems with that person on the inside of your organization. Once we've completed the legal requirements, we can get to work with putting together the technical pieces that will allow this onboarding process to occur. One of the first things that usually occurs is you need some type of connection to the third party. They're probably going to gain access to information within your organization, and you might need to access data and resources that are in their organization. Usually you accomplish this by building an encrypted tunnel between the locations. You can use your existing public internet connection, but instead encrypt the data on both sides so that even though the information is going across the internet, all of the data is still protected. If all of the information and resources will be in the same data center, there's still usually a physical segmentation between your equipment and their equipment. And at the very least, there's a logical segmentation that will keep your data protected from the third party, usually with a firewall or some other type of security device in between. Once we've built the road that will allow all this data to traverse, we need to create some way to authenticate access into either our network or the remote side. In those particular cases, we need to put together some standard authentication mechanism. Usually this is done through a third-party authentication server that's running Radius or TACAX+. This will allow us to create usernames that will allow people from the onboarding organization to gain access to the internal resources of our company. You should also audit your security controls to make sure they're working properly. The third party that's now onboarded should have access to the data they need, but you should make sure that you're limiting that access inside of your organization. These projects that require the onboarding of another organization may be very short term, or they might last for years, but eventually the project or requirement will come to an end and you'll need to begin the offboarding process. Ideally, the time frame and details of offboarding this third party should have been figured out well during the beginning phase of the onboarding. This way, you'll know exactly the process will go through, you'll know the time frames that everyone will be expecting, and you'll be assured that the entire process would have been covered from end to end without missing any steps in between. One of the questions you'll need to have answered is, how do you separate the systems that you've been using and return them to their proper owners? If there is a clear delineation between your equipment and the third party, then that's probably something that's very easy to determine. But occasionally on these projects, you have equipment that's being shared by both organizations. And so the offboarding process will need to determine how to properly remove that equipment and return it to the rightful owner. Perhaps even more important is what happens to the data itself. Who owns the data? And when you are now offboarding, who gets to keep that data? Do both sides of the organization maintain ownership of the data? Is only one side going to now have access to that information? All of this obviously needs to be determined before the offboarding process even occurs. And of course, everybody needs to be completely aware of when the final connection will be terminated between the two organizations, especially if you're dealing with lease lines where a termination of a link may require 30 days or more to have that re-enabled. You don't want to turn off a connection and then realize there was more work to be done. So this is an extremely important date to consider during the offboarding process.